You are listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I interviewed Rahul Dev Manchanda. Rahul is an attorney and the author of the Deep State Defector series of conservative political books. As some of the books I am currently writing are left-of-center political nonfiction books, it was interesting to interview someone with a lot of political views that were different than my own. I'm here with Rahul Dev Manchanda. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
That is correct, sir.
Who is the author of a conservative political nonfiction book called nonfiction book series called the Deep State Defector series, and is an attorney. Rahul, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Now, feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Great. My name is Rahul Manchanda. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing in my own law practice on Wall Street, coming on 21 years now. Before that, I used to travel a lot, do different things here and there. And over the course of my career, have sort of run up against certain glass ceilings or glass walls, if you will, that have sort of indirectly drawn a very, very clear, lucid picture of what, the deep state is, or the hidden hand, if you will. Been a member of certain secret societies, which can remain nameless or shall remain nameless. I've sort of been on the inside of certain things in D.C. circuit, in the New York, Manhattan circuit, financial circuit, as a participant or as a wallflower, take your pick. Don't really consider myself these books conservative books, although I am leaning towards a conservative side of thought, because I think the left side has gone a little absolutely crazy in this country. Personally, I think it's for shock value to see how far they can go. And I think that this whole thing in the Ukraine right now is a real showdown between East and West, and conservative values and leftist values, and I think they're really kind of duking it out. Everyone's got to sort of have some skin in the game over there, and how this war turns out will really dictate the way the world turns out in the future. Things right now in this country are really scary and frightening to me, such as 9-month abortions, or transgenderism on children, child trafficking. This kind of stuff really, really skeeves me out. And I think it's the sort of mountain that I think a lot of people are willing, especially Americans, are quote unquote willing to die on. I mean, that's just a phrase meaning, this is where we say no mas, enough is enough. We've got an attorney, a surgeon general who has no problem lopping off children's genitals without parent consent, and giving them all sorts of hormonal therapy. So I think things have gotten out of hand. And the 9-month abortion thing really just really was the straw that broke the camel's back. I've been writing about things like this since 2014, 15, starting with the BRICS Bank as being competition to the World Bank, IMF, and sort of giving them a run for their money, because it seems to me like the oligarch and plutocrat class is extremely arrogant in the West and NATO, and they made up a lot of perverts who are held unaccountable for their actions and their deeds. I mean, there's stories about like the Jeffrey Epstein circle and all these people doing crazy things and getting away with it. You saw the Panama Papers issue, and I think something just happened with Prince Andrew just the other day. There was a story that came out. I couldn't verify if it was true or not. Pretty disgusting stuff. So maybe we need a good dose of the Russian Orthodox Christian Church in the form of Putin and Patriarch Kirill, and the East Orthodox Church that used to be Constantinople, and some of the Islamics, and maybe drive it back a little bit, some of this Luciferian satanic mix that we have going on in the West. So that's where I'm coming from here. Yep. I don't know if that is too much or too little.
Coming from a much different political view, but I will say the stuff regarding Prince Andrew is pretty alarming.
Did you hear about that? I didn't want to say it because I wasn't sure if it was true, but yeah.
I know he's a sex pest, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, not a good story. Very disturbing. But I don't know if it's true or not. I saw it on TikTok, so It might be
And
BS.
of course, TikTok's kind of the black hole of the internet. So.
It is for sure. It is for sure.
Now, without spoiling too much of your book series, what is your Deep State Defector series of books about?
Sir, great question. So there's 6 books now, Deep State Defector 1 through 6. And really, they're about exposing or trying to expose corruption or expose the inner workings of what I call, others call the deep state, which is this never-changing sort of underlying government, which kind of controls the puppet strings of Democrats and conservatives, the sort of unchanging, bedrock that never seems to change generationally, and foreign and domestic policy remains the same in the face of even progressive change. Certain old value systems that are even harmful old value systems, such as colonialism or racism or slavery or murder, in war, genocide. These things we're supposed to evolve from things like this: starvation of lower socioeconomic people, violation of civil and human rights, things like that continue. Bombings of poor people with the military-industrial complex somehow never seems to change, even though we seem to evolve in so many other ways. We live in a world of artificial intelligence, yet we can't seem to get it together to stop killing brown and black people around the world. And I just think that some of these things that I see are preserved and manifested even in our own government. In the three branches of government in the U.S. is legislative, executive, and the judiciary, and how they're bought off and sold like potatoes by the oligarchs and plutocrats who control both the Democrats and the Republicans. And it's all just BS to say that there's a left-right paradigm. There isn't. It's the Wizard of Oz, and these guys and women tend to control both sides of it. And they just make a mockery of the whole process of this fiction that we call dualism in this country. There is no left and right. It's just the deep state, just the oligarchy, just the plutocracy. And it drives me nuts to see this, that, essentially, people who believe in this stuff think that it's real, but it's not. So
now, I was going to ask you to define the deep state for me, but you've already done that, so I'll skip to my next question.
Sure.
Is your book series self-published or traditionally published?
That's a great question. It's kind of a combination of all of the above, in the sense that it's an amalgamation. A lot of my essays are published through online media. So I have actually been a columnist for many different websites, online alternative media, in about 20 different websites, 20 different online media websites. And so a lot of these articles, in fact, I would say 80 to 90% of them are just collections and compilations of not self-published. So they're like-minded people like myself who feel like exposing these people, but also have the balls to publish them. I mean, we know that most people, most media conglomerates, and especially now, big tech, will run away from the material that I write about and the conclusions that I come to. I mean, it's really disappointing and disgusting. For example, at Amazon.com and Kindle have banned several of my books in the Deep State 1 through 6 series, and their generic canned responses, because it doesn't fit within their content guidelines, which is basically book burning or book banning of Nazi Germany or whatever, Soviet Union, which I actually was really shocked and hurt by in the beginning. But then I realized once I put that on my books and advertised on it, it actually sold more books. What the hell are they banning? This is the country of the First Amendment, freedom of speech. We're supposed to, be able to say and speak to what we feel and what we observe. So, when Amazon and Kindle banned my books, a few of them, I actually thought that was pretty cool. After the fact. So there you have it. So some of these materials that I've written about, are true, and they can all be back. I remember I'm a lawyer for 25 years. I don't say anything that I can't prove. So either with discovery or a trial, if I was allowed to do so, a lot of these chapters that I've written are lawsuits that I've brought, cases that I've brought, claims that I've filed, complaints that I've drafted that have gone nowhere, that get shit canned, right away by the powers that be because they don't want these issues to see the light of day. So a lot of these chapters and books that I've written have to do with things that really just got under my skin, and either for my clients or for myself as a litigant, or that we couldn't get somewhere, and they were so blatantly unjust and blatantly smacking of corruption and cronyism or money or seediness or whatever the case may be, that they just had to be written about. And about 20 years ago, I went to the FBI building in New York to complain about some of the corruption that I was experiencing. And one of the FBI duty agents came downstairs at 2600 Plaza and told me, you know what, why don't you write about this stuff? Instead of filing complaints about it and getting it shit canned, you should write about it. And I'll never forget that guy. So over the last 10 years, I've been writing more and more. Since about 2014, when the Ukraine war started, I started tweeting, and some of these tweets turned into themes, and that could have been broken down. And so, for example, the first couple of chapters were about the surreptitious reincarnation of COINTELPRO in the United States, the surveillance state, the police state, how in the 1970s, Frank Church in the Senate hearings banned the FBI COINTELPRO program, which is basically like the Stasi or the KGB program in the United States, going after political dissenters, the Black Panthers, anybody who kind of rocked the boat, were free thinkers, whatever the case may be, and how Frank Church and the Senate went after them and outlawed COINTELPRO. Well, flash forward to Oklahoma City bombings in 1994, 95, and then Clinton and Biden reenacted all these things, such as the COPS program, the community-oriented policing program of the Department of Justice. And COPS, really, community-oriented policing, just that alone tells you that they recruit people from the community to stalk and surveil and to report on you. And so your mailman next door or your landlord next door could be, an informant for the police, which is totally un-American. And then look, I mean, for certain things, it's okay, I guess, for drugs and things of that nature. But when this kind of power is in the hands of the regular population, there tends to be abuse of that. Abuse for purposes of power, maybe to get a little money, maybe, they become bullies themselves, and it becomes a police state, but you're surrounded by gang stalkers all around you and surveillance who work with police departments they get rewarded. They get money, they get perks. If they commit crimes, law enforcement looks the other way. So that was the beginning of looking into that, and how that's now grown into the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, after the 9/11 attacks, and ICE. And now Department of Homeland Security, in this country, the final touches were put on by a guy named Marcus Wolf, who was imported from Europe. And he cut his teeth in the KGB and the NKVD in the Soviet Union, and later worked with the German Stasi in his younger days. And then when he was done with his career, he was invited over by guys in America who founded the Department of Homeland Security and asked to put the finishing touches on the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, with their fusion centers and their mass surveillance. Now, every single thing that we say, do, fax, email is, fed through, a carnivore system, and all our information is data mined, and there's no privacy, there's no Fourth Amendment, there's no First Amendment. And then we got into how big tech and big media and big pharma have become literally tools of the U.S. government, so that when the U.S. government is prohibited from violating the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, Second Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, instead of doing it themselves, they, it's like a hand going into a glove. They use big oligarch, plutocrat business with the plausible deniability that, oh, we can't regulate private companies. So when Twitter bans your speech or cancel cultures you out because of controversial things that you speak about, they're not violating the First Amendment because they're a private company, right? Meanwhile, it's determined that the FBI has agents planted or former FBI agents planted all throughout Twitter who are literally monitoring what the American people are talking about. Or Amazon.com, which is online, responsible for 99% of online books, can now decide what books the Americans and the world can read or not, based on what a couple guys in the back room or a couple women in the back room don't like. That undermines the First Amendment as well. So, just like in the 90s, the CIA had In-Q-Tel, which basically funded big tech and certain, Silicon Valley companies, but nobody really knew that In-Q-Tel was a CIA branch. And so these companies would succeed as long as they, made a deal with the devil. And these are some of the biggest tech companies that we have now today. So it's a problem. Big media is really owned by one deep state, left or right, MSNBC or Fox News, Newsmax. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you watch. It's all the same. There are certain lines you cannot cross. And there are certain things you cannot say. And there are certain observations that you cannot make in the deep state.
Okay. You got a lot of points across there. Now, do you
6 books.
plan on writing more books in the series or any books outside of the Deep State Defector series?
Well, this has been a prolific year, 2023. Been a lot of changes. So I usually got maybe a book out every 1 or 2 years. As I would write chapters, I wouldn't issue them until I see 20, 30 chapters. But 2023 has been a very prolific year for some reason. So I actually issued Deep State Defector 5 and 6 in the year 2023. Deep State Defector 5 came out in January 2023, beginning of this year. And Deep State Defector 6 just came out a couple of weeks ago, in August 2023. And my last chapter of that book was how the term woke was really just an ultimate gaslight, for example, by the deep state. You think about the word being awake is a good thing. It means you're awake. The wool is no longer pulled over your eyes. You see the Wizard of Oz for the little scrawny, little mealy mouth, wimp that he is pulling the strings, right? But the biggest gag on all the people that woke has become a bad word. In the sense that if somebody's called woke, they're a complainer or an abuser of equity. They're a perpetual victim, blah, 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 which to some extent, there's a lot of con artists out there who claim victimhood status. But there are a lot of grievances and gripes too. And being awake is actually a good thing. So the last chapter I conclude with is about how woke is the ultimate, tongue-in-cheek joke by the deep state, and the big users of that term are the big media, which calls anybody who, tends to draw attention to certain conspiracies of the deep state and call them out to the mat as being woke, as part of the cancel culture. So that was chapter 20 of Deep State Defector 6. I also talk a lot about how the global oligarchy and the global communism has now merged officially, so that we now live in a top-down detention camp, and it's getting smaller and smaller, and our rights are getting removed and abrogated more and more on a daily basis. Now, our civil rights or civil liberties, our constitutional rights in this country and around the world are getting removed by this merger between the deep state oligarchs and the deep state communists around the world. And they've realized that they're not enemies of each other. The deep state oligarchs and plutocrats have an inherent need and desire to maintain the status quo of their money power, their billions and trillions of dollars. And the communist governments have an inherent need to maintain stability and non-change in the masses that they rule over globally. So That's why you see guys like Elon Musk going over to China and having lunch with Xi Jinping a couple months ago. What the hell was that all about? But at the same time, Jeff Bezos of Amazon.com and Jack Ma of Alibaba of China, which is a communist PRC company, have more in common with each other than the masses do with them. So they realize, look, why are we even fighting? Why, this is all a show, a puppet show for the masses to think that they have some autonomy and some say in what's going on. But in reality, behind the scenes, the oligarchs and the plutocrats are laughing their asses off at the people of the world, 8-9 billion strong, and in my opinion, culling them and killing them off with things periodically produced diseases, that are now apparently manufactured in gain-of-function laboratories, which, of course, Ron Paul, for example, referred Dr. Fauci for a criminal referral for investigation because he lied about gain-of-function research with virology. So, the culling of humanity is occurring. And so this is really, propaganda is going full steam with the big media and big tech. Julian Assange also revealed some of that big tech stuff about how Google was involved in State Department stuff, and in terms of Libya, in terms of propagandizing certain issues and Syria, ISIS. And then we find out that ISIS, for example, was a U.S. paramilitary organization with the assistance. Actually, General Mike Flynn was the one who revealed that, and that's kind of why he got indicted, right? He said that on Russian television, that ISIS was, in fact, a British, Saudi, U.S., Israeli intelligence operation, paramilitary, designed to topple these Arab governments that we just didn't like Bashar Assad and Libya and, all those other guys. And they tried to do Iran with MEK, Mujahideen Khalq, but that didn't turn out so well. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about, right?
Yeah, and I only have enough time for a couple more questions.
Yes, sir.
What are some key differences between the American judicial and legal system and the judicial and legal system of countries in continental Europe, such as France?
Well, I mean, it's something I used to work in when I used to work in Paris for a law firm out there. The European code is a civil code, and it's based on the Roman Justinian code of law, which is a civil code. It tends to be more black and white, yes and no, right and wrong. Whereas the U.S. government and the British have the common law-based system, which is inherently more progressive. So we have the ability here in this country and in Britain, which is a wonderful thing, to actually argue about things that have changed and why they should, why our legal bodies should change with humanity and as it progresses. Now, that's a good thing, but it also could be a bad thing because you could also have very moneyed entities have a lot of money for lobbying power to purchase judges like potatoes and come up with some really perverted, sick legislation that Europe would not even stand for. But at the same time, it's also a good thing because you have great things that have happened because of the common law, such as the women's right to vote, African-American liberation and right to vote, the end of slavery, civil rights legislation. These are wonderful, wonderful things that have happened because of the common law in America and Britain. But they've also created things like, a federal right to having an abortion, which really should be left to the states. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have a right to kill a 9-month-old baby. That really should be left to the states and people's senses and sensibilities and their religious beliefs and moral beliefs and things of that nature. So there's, or transgenderism on children or things of that nature. So there has to be a limit. And I think that's, like I said earlier, that's kind of one of the reasons that Europe is the site of a war right now in the Ukraine. People are fighting about the future. What is it going to look like? And I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to accept the results. But even Larry Fink of BlackRock, which supposedly is the richest company in the world, went on national TV on an interview saying we really have to force behavior patterns using money. We have to force behavior patterns around the world. Now, who the hell is he to say that about, forcing behavior patterns on the masses of the world? Everyone's got their own personal beliefs, values, religions, morals. Who the hell is Larry Fink to decide that he's got to force it down people's throats? Does
Last
that make
time I
sense?
checked, Larry Fink was a executive for a corporation
BlackRock.
and not
BlackRock.
a public elected official.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly correct. That's right. BlackRock is the name of this company. And I don't know who the hell he thinks he is. But it's infuriating. Guys like him and George Soros or the Koch brothers, for example, really just view the world as chess pieces and people as pawns in their game towards ultimate, or Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, conservative wings on their end. These huge plutocrats, oligarchs are masters of the universe. And these are the architects of the wars that are killing millions and millions of people in the Ukraine around the world. They're Luciferians. They believe they have the power of life and death over men and women and children. Like Madeleine Albright once said, 500,000 dead Iraqi children. Well, that's just collateral damage, she said, right? 500,000 poor little brown kids didn't do anything to anybody. Just slaughtered like pigs. For Madeleine Albright, it was collateral damage, she said, right? Rinse, lather, repeat with these psychopaths. And I think that's really what this book is about. I think a lot of people are just sick to the back teeth with these people. And they should be exposed. They should be written about and talked about. They shouldn't be able to hide in shadows, murdering and killing at will. They should be exposed. At the very least, people should write about them and talk about it, right? At least. So,
yeah, you like to push everyone's buttons, don't you?
No, I just, you know what? I've been a victim myself of the deep state. I've had some serious pains in my life, which is, exceeds the scope of this conversation. Mm-hmm. So without me getting personal about it, it's all in the courts. It's all public record. But I have been victimized myself because I refused to toe the line. I was part of the deep state at one point. I mean, if you Google me, you'll see pictures of me standing with former presidents of the United States, traveling all around the world in fucked up countries that nobody would ever go to, like Iran. All throughout my life, I've been there. I've held the hand of the devil, and I've held the hand of the angels. And I was inside, hanging out with certain, movers and shakers of the global deep state, the world deep side. But I just couldn't deal with it. I wanted to puke. You understand?
I understand. So yeah. Now
that's why I'm a defector. I probably could have done a lot. I could have probably been, who knows? But the point is, I just couldn't do it. It made me want to vomit. And I was used on Fox News and CNN in the early 2000s to sell the Iraq War. When I didn't know any better, people giving me my lines, giving me my, what I should say. In advance. I knew early on that the media was canned and bullshit. Big media was total bullshit. The CIA had a program called Operation Mockingbird, which is, propaganda through media. But we're America. We're supposed to be free, right? We're not supposed to have the Soviet Union style propaganda or Nazi Germany propaganda. We're supposed to be able to say whatever we feel, and the First Amendment. But Donald Rumsfeld even talked about how they needed to create a new wing for propaganda because they were losing hearts and minds when it came to September 11th and taking out 7 countries in 7 years, according to General Wesley Clark of NATO. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Other than book, this is my final question. Other than books you have written, what books do you like to read?
Great question. I don't really read fiction anymore. I read. I guess I don't. I don't read false books, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I read the news because that's the best movie and books you'll ever read in your life. That's the biggest drama you'll ever get. I get my daily Twitter dosages and Facebook, and I just read that stuff because it's like you need popcorn to read the Twitter these days, the news and what's happening. Things are moving so fast right now that I just literally couldn't waste my time reading bullshit books like I used to, like Tom Clancy novels and John Grisham novels, like I did when I was in high school or college, which I used to love. Um, but I read the news now. That gives me enough entertainment. Occasionally, with my wife, who I love, I watch some of these TV shows like that she likes. Like basically they're just soap operas, but but that's only because I love my wife and we spend time together. But for my own personal happiness, I read Twitter. I read the news, and I got basically about 150 periodicals that I scan every day, and I read them like very quickly, like a blitzkrieg. I digest the news, and I do analysis, and sometimes I write articles based on what I see, and if I connect certain dots, if I see certain patterns. Some things are not obvious. You got to extrapolate a little bit, and then it turns out to be true a lot of times. And the people that read my articles are like, holy shit, So that's what I read nowadays.
Okay, Rahul Dev Manchanda, thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast. You were a very wonderful guest.
Thank you very much for your kindness and your time on your show. I really do appreciate that.
In closing of this episode, I'll do something I almost never do on this podcast and talk about my own political views and why I have an open door policy regarding guests on this podcast. Many of you know that my political views are left of center on an ideological spectrum. I'm pro-reproductive rights, pro-LGBTQIA+ rights, pro-workers' rights, and strongly supportive of social and economic justice. However, this podcast is not inherently a political podcast and is first, foremost, and above all else, a writing podcast. As such, I maintain an open door policy regarding interview guests. I usually don't ask more than one or two political questions to guests on here, and if I don't feel like I must ask a guest on here a political question at all, I won't, which is the case for most of my guests on here. I try to avoid asking questions that might cause a guest to leave the interview abruptly. Writing is freedom, and that is a universal truth. I don't decline interviews from guests who are writers or do writing related or writing adjacent work and express political views that are different from my own, as I feel that doing so would be analogous to book banning, which is something that I am very strongly against. If you've written a book or a professional writer of any kind, or if you're involved in any writing related or writing adjacent work, I am open to interviewing you, and in turn, I will try to be respectful towards you as I can. I thank Rahul for appearing on this podcast, and he was a wonderful guest for this podcast. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to never be afraid to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at authoraac and on Instagram at aacscribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.